Good day again, students, and welcome to week 4. Today we're going to look at HRM and strategy, or rather strategic human resources management, as well as human resources planning, making sure to understand that these are two very different topics, one, of course, which is a part of the other. So in terms of objectives, we're going to really try to understand what strategic HRM is and HR planning. And these are the three main objectives: to identify the advantages of integrating HR planning with strategic planning, to understand how an organization's competitive environment actually influences strategic planning, and to recognize the importance of an internal resource analysis. And these are the things we're just going to look at basically in next week when we continue with this topic. So a lot of big corporate sounding words here. We're going to do a little recap first, of course, to make sure everyone's clear on what strategic planning is, and then how on earth do we integrate strategic HRM with HR planning, etc., etc. So let's think for a minute. And again, we touched on this really briefly at the end of week 3. But does HR have a strategic role to play? What might that role be? Now, the reality is in a lot of organizations in Trinbago, in fact, a lot of organizations all over the world, HR does not have a strategic role. They tend to be the implementers of things. They tend to have policy and procedures which may support the strategic objectives of an organization. But a lot of times they're not involved in that strategic table discussion about where the organization wants to go. So it's twofold. So I think we will all agree on this, that the knowledge, skills, and abilities of all the employees must be harnessed to achieve an organization's objective. And therefore, the strategic role of HR is in determining what these policies should be and enacting or implementing these policies that basically allow, or as I said here, to help shape the corporate strategy and the objectives of the organization. So let's get this clear, because there's a lot going on in this sentence, okay? HR's role is definitely to ensure that we determine what policies are needed and we enact them or put them in place. These in themselves should help us achieve the organization's objectives, but they can also help shape what the strategy would be. And we'll get into this a bit more as to this twofold role of HR. So what actually is strategic planning? So again, right back to management 125, principles of management, a prereq for this course. What exactly does strategic planning involve? So some of you would remember vision, mission, strategic goals, but to define strategic planning, it is basically how we go about deciding what we want to achieve. So probably a little better said, it is the procedures for making decisions about the organization's long-term goals and strategies. So it is all that we do, i.e. the procedures, that makes us choose or come up with the right decision, or how we make the decision to determine what our goals and strategies will be. And often, when we're talking about strategic planning, you got to talk about vision, mission, and of course, strategic goals, right? And then operational goals. So let's just touch a little bit on here. I'm sure we all remember vision, mission, strategic goals, and operational goals, just to make sure we clearly understand the difference. The strategic goals are the goals of the overall organization. So they're at like the very much the conceptual or holistic level. What does the organization want to achieve as a whole? The operational goals are at a lower level. And when the operational goals are achieved, then the strategic goals will be achieved. So this is a pretty standard diagram that you would see when we talk about strategic planning. So we're just going to briefly run through this and then go through it in a little bit more detail as it relates to HR. So without even looking at all the language here, we know that an organization must have a vision and a mission and then core values. We'll talk a little bit about more of what core values are, but ideally they should be the values that an organization would like everyone to demonstrate. It's what it sort of defines the personality of the organization and the culture. So again, we know we need to do an external analysis and an internal analysis. So of course, the last week we looked at PESTLE. That's definitely a way of looking at the external environment. But what the SWOT analysis will allow to do is look at ourselves. So it's an internal analysis of where we are. And from an external point of view, what are the opportunities we have or the threats that may be facing us? Again, obviously, we got to do this if we're going to try and think about what we're going to achieve. Then we formulate strategy, and usually this is done at 3 levels, so corporate, business, or operational, functional. We implement strategy, and then we evaluate. So how often should this happen? Well, organizations tend to have, they don't tend to change their mission and vision and values too much. It's sort of a very long-term way of thinking. A SWOT and a PESTLE analysis should probably happen every year. Based on that, we come up with the different levels of goals that we want to achieve, or the different forms, the different strategies that we're going to come up with. This is in strategy formulation. Then we implement, and then we evaluate. So really, from a SWOT analysis down, should happen every year. Now, we may have long-term goals, shorter-term goals, that's fine, but really, strategic planning is something that should happen at least annually. So where does strategic HR fit into this? Now, I kind of dislike the term strategic HR because in my head, HRM must be strategic. HRM exists to help the organizations meet its strategic goals. We're not just doing this vai, but we're actually achieving goals because that's what the organization is trying to do. So to me, to say strategic HR, it's kind of the same thing, because if we're not focusing on goals, then what's the point? But nevertheless, what do we mean by strategic HR? So it is seen to be the pattern of human resources activities and deployment, so everything that happens in HR and how we deploy people, that enable an organization to achieve its strategic goals. So back to what I just said, to me that's just the definition of really what HR is, right? So it is what we do in HR and how we deploy people that enable the organization to achieve its goals. And then it's done here by formulating strategy and implementing it. So providing input as to what is possible given the type and number of people available. And I also think a lot of it there has to look at culture, etc. But really, HR should be able to have a really loud voice in determining what strategy should be, or in formulating strategy. So they should be the ones to say, no, we do not have enough people with that competency. Perhaps we should not go there. Or yes, we actually have a lot of people who can do this and there's potential for growth, so we should go there. They shouldn't just be taking what is fed to them and implementing, but they should have a real voice in formulating strategy, because of course what your human resources are capable of doing and how many you have would be critical to whether or not the organization can meet its goals. And then, of course, strategy implementation. So how do you actually decide how to allocate your resources? What sort of structures are you going to put in place? What sort of policies and procedures? How many staff do you need? So based on the strategy, now what do we need to put in place to get it done from an HR perspective? So as a quick example, let's say, I think I used this before, but it does make the most sense. Let's say an organization has 10 units and they want to open an 11th unit. HR should be the ones to say, yes, I think we can get the staff with the right criteria. Yes or no, I don't think we will be able to find the staff with the right criteria. In that particular area, we already have a lot of existing staff, so maybe we can. They should be or should be involved in, that's the word, should be involved in determining if this 11th is a good idea from an HR perspective. And if the organization and everybody agrees, yes, it is, then the implementation for HR would be that they need to get the right numbers of staff, they need to hire people in the area, they need to train, etc., etc. So the next topic we need to introduce is HR planning, which has traditionally been known as manpower planning. I think we're moving away from the term manpower because, well, we should, but in a lot of organizations it's still used. So what is HR planning? It's the process of anticipating and making provision for the movement of flow of people into, within, and out of an organization. So HRP, as it's often known, or human resource planning, is all about how we determine how people are going to move in the organization. So how many people do we need? How many people do we have? How many people are going to leave? How many people need to be in this department versus that one? How many people of a certain competence do we need at this level, etc.? Anything to do with what we need and how we move people around the organization. So obviously something like succession planning is a big part of this. Are we planning for when people leave that there is someone who can step into that role? Or if we know we have an employee turnover of 20% a year, are we trying to recruit to make sure that we will always have enough staff considering so many are leaving, etc., etc.? So then how do these two things, or how does everything link together now? So we know what strategic HRM is, which is really HRM with a true strategic focus and voice. And of course, now we know what HR planning is, okay? So an analysis is usually done of an organization, and one of the clear questions we have to ask is what human resources are needed and what do we have available, which of course is the HR planning function. And then what is required and necessary in support of HR is the HR function generally. So the human resource planning role plays a huge role in analyzing the current environment, internal environment of the organization in terms of the staffing that we have and the competencies that they have. And then of course, we've talked about this before, the implementation of HR. Okay, so let's just quickly try and work through 3 of the steps today. Not all, there's 6 in all together. So the first one, of course, is mission, vision, and values. What do these terms actually mean? Well, again, all of you know this. So mission, the basic purpose of the organization and the scope of its operations. It's sort of the how we achieve the vision. And the vision is the statement about where we want to be in the future. So it's all about the long-term direction of the company and its strategic intent. And then the one perhaps not everyone is familiar with is the core values. So those strong and enduring beliefs and principles that the company uses as a foundation for its decisions. Now, there are not many organizations who truly embrace core values. I mean, having them stuck up on a wall is not core values, but if people really live from that space. So if one of your core values is being customer focused, it would mean that everybody operates from that platform. Every decision is made with the customer in mind, etc. So if one of your core values is respect, then you would expect that everybody respects everybody, that people can disagree amicably, and that respect just governs how we work. So they're important things to have. Okay, so think about where you work or an organization that you are familiar with for a while. Do they have a mission and vision? I hope they do. Do you know it? Do they have core values? And then these 2 interesting questions. Does everyone know these things? Because it's one thing, as again, to have it stuck up on a wall. Does everyone really know it and believe it to be true? Are they visibly posted for everyone to see? Or is it something that you just tend to hear in orientation and never again? Yeah, so things to think about. So let's say we're running a chain of 5 sports bars in Trinidad and Tobago, and as our corporate social responsibility, we also run 5 not-for-profit after-school homework centers. Would we be able to come up with a vision and a mission and core values? I'm sure we would. So based on what we were trying to achieve, if we wanted our sports bars to be, very customer friendly, very comfortable, a safe environment where people feel at home, or if we wanted to be the best possible experience for sports entertainment, I'm sure we could come up with a vision. The mission would follow that, how we intend to do things, and then the core values. So for example, the core value in the restaurant might be one of customer focus or quality products, whereas the vision in the not-for-profit after-school homework centers may be one about, having a great impact on society through education. The mission would be the actual provision of the classes, and the core value there might be professionalism or one of coaching and support. So depending on the type of institution, and obviously, of course, depending on what the owners or the managers want, your vision and mission and core values may be quite different. So step 2 is all about environmental scanning, but I know my video is going to end soon. So let's just end at step 1 about vision, mission, and core values, and we'll return to step 2 in the second part of this presentation.